Okay, so we're going to look at criticisms of Plato's forms today. So these are arguments against the existence of Plato's forms. This is part one. So we're going to look at one argument today. The key idea with this argument, and this argument is called the third man argument. The key idea with it is that the forms don't provide ultimate explanation. Now remember, the whole point of the forms is that they are kind of the buck at which it stops. Explanations don't need to go further than that. Where do universal concepts come from? The forms. Done. But the criticism today is that actually they don't provide ultimate explanation. There's more to it than that. Just let's start with a quick reminder of what Plato's saying. Now, Plato has said that there are these forms which are the ideal thing of which there are versions in the world. This is the one over many. So that's the one over the many. Okay, so you have one instance of which these partake. Do you remember that? They partake from them. So the form, of course, is not part of the group, but these all are chairs which take part in the abstract idea of chair. That's the idea with Plato's forms, and that's the idea that we're going to be criticizing today. So this is the third man criticism. Now, the third man criticism says this. Point one is that if we have an instance of a thing, let's take an instance of a thing. Here's the earth, for example. Here is an Athenian temple. What do they have in common? What group do they partake in jointly? Well, they partake in this idea of, this very abstract idea of largeness. The largeness of them is clear in both. So basically, for each thing, for each particular, so each thing, there's a form. In this instance, the form here is large, as well as loads of others. But the problem is this, and I think it's a big one. Isn't the form of the large also large? Right? It's big. That's why it's the form of the large. But of course, if it's large, then there must be a thing in which it partakes. An even larger form of the large. And that is a big problem for Plato. Now, credit to him, it was Plato who pointed it out. Plato says here, what about large itself and the other larges? Will not some large one again appear? This is from the Parmenides dialogue. So Plato himself criticizes his own argument by saying, one second, there is a little bit, his own theory, sorry, there is a little bit of a problem, and the problem is that large is also large and will have to partake in the largeness. So the form, oh, that's a bit close, isn't it? The form is also an example. And so there must be another form, because remember, the form is not part of the group. And so you can't say, oh, it's all one large thing. Instead, the largeness must come from somewhere else. So this is why premise one here in our argument is that there must be, according to this argument, an infinite, I draw infinite like that, an infinite chain of forms. That's what the logic of the forms kind of compels us to, as Plato again himself noted. And each of the characters, the forms, will no longer be one for you, but unlimited in multitude. So they will just keep on going forever. And that is a really big problem. It's a sorry, I missed the book there. It's a really big problem because Plato doesn't think that things can be infinite. He says that infinites aren't possible. We can't have an infinite thing. It also doesn't provide an ultimate explanation if there's another thing and then another thing and then another thing, on and on and on. So if there must be an infinite chain of forms according to the theory of the forms, that seems to be an implication, and infinites aren't possible, well, the conclusion then is that the forms aren't possible. Now, there's one final question you may be having in your minds, and I think it's a reasonable one. Why on earth is it called the third man criticism? I haven't mentioned man at all. Well, the reason is because whilst Plato originally stated this criticism to his own argument, it was actually his student Aristotle who put it in what is perhaps an even more convincing way. He says, look, there are lots of instances of man, of people. Here are some weirdly identical instances because I can't draw people. Now, those instances here must be part of the category of man, that is, the form of man. So there must be a form of man. But this form here is also, of course, a man. But if we're going to call it a man, then it must partake of course, a form. Ooh, that is the wrong colour. A form, an even better form of man. And that means that it must go on forever. This, by the way, is the third man. And as soon as you admit that that's the case, you have an infinite chain and the concept of the forms breaks down.